In a fascinating move considering the console's price hikes across the last 2 years, Sony have now reduced the PlayStation 5 by over £130 for its Black Friday deals. Now, if you want to snatch up the various deals that are doing the rounds, head to the link in the description below. We've hoovered up different affiliate links and you can follow them straight through to Amazon and get your hands on one of these bundles. It's worth saying that we're not sponsored by Sony themselves. However, this is an unprecedented amount of money for them to drop for a particular holiday season like this, and so we wouldn't be doing our duty as game covering aficionados if we didn't point you in that direction in this particular way. The PlayStation 5 Standard is down to £379 from $479.99. The PlayStation 5 Pro is down to $589.99, down from $699.99, and you can get a DualSense for £43, down from $64.99. That's only mentioning a few of the deals available, but like I said, follow the link in the description and see what you think. I'm in a Christmas jumper. You know, I like to bring the good tidings. Yes, I am a bit early, but this is also one of the warmest things that I own. As for the why that I mentioned earlier, this is where it gets really weird, and you'll be seeing a lot of headlines and stories around the availability of memory in computing itself and computer manufacturing. There's an ongoing debate, discussion, reveal, or whatever around just how much memory usage the average AI company is hoovering up. And if you Google, you can go on Tech Radar, they've done a fantastic write-up on the GPU shortage that is emerging overall. There are rumors that sadly Xbox are going to have to put their console prices up yet again, because there's a whole shortfall, like I said, of availability around memory storage and GPUs, system components that go into the Xbox consoles, and they did not plan for this. You can look to the likes of tech leaker Moore's Law is Dead, being quite frank about it over on his podcast, saying they didn't plan for this whatsoever. However, we can bring it back around to the Sony side, because apparently Sony did plan for this thing and did hoover up all sorts of GPU wafers and VRAM tech and all these technological terms that I barely understand. I'm a console gamer, I barely understand PC. However, Sony did plan enough in advance to have a surplus of all the components available to make more PlayStation 5s, and it seems like they are massively on top of supply and demand, allowing not only, they price hiked across the last couple of years, but not only to bring the price down for just one of the systems, but for the entire PlayStation 5 range during Black Friday. There's going to be a ridiculous amount of demand around the PlayStation 5, but that is the why. It's interesting looking at the terrain overall of the generation. Obviously, we're around about the halfway mark. Myself and Josh just did a Best Games of the Generation podcast that we've pre-recorded for December, so keep your eyes on the What Culture Gaming podcast feed for that. We broke down the best games all the way back, going back to November 10th, the dawn of the generation in the 2020s. But like I said, overall for the generation, looking to the future, GTA 6 is going to be a huge deal in 2026, provided Rockstar/Take-Two actually stick to the release date that they've mentioned. And clearly, Sony want to get as many of these systems out there as possible, either so that when they do announce, an inevitable price hike around the GPU components and memory storage, most people will have already got their hands on a PlayStation 5 and they can be, more happily remembered for the Black Friday deal that they did at the end of 2025 because they saw this stuff coming, or just because they want to have even more market share domination in regards to Xbox and Switch too. And because the new price reductions for the PlayStation 5 does put it way more in line with an Xbox Series S, or you can look to the likes of the PlayStation 5's reduction in Japan, putting it right alongside the price point of a Nintendo Switch 2. So things are getting very heated in regards to the competition and the console pricing models, and Sony would rather as many people have a PlayStation 5 in their hands as possible when the likes of GTA 6 comes around, even if that means that they make a loss in the short term, because it's going to be a hell of a lot of rough terrain to navigate in the next couple of years. Whether it's through supply and demand, whether it is through Sony trying to read the tea leaves well in advance and be able to snatch up all of these components just enough ahead of time, or whether it is in relation to, the US tariffs, the increase in pricing, there is clearly a war coming in regards to GPU computer components, and Sony are playing a hand early on to make sure that they get ahead of, like I said, the availability of the systems and try and get them in front of as many people as possible. It's also worth mentioning that it was recently reported that the PlayStation 5 has outsold every single Xbox in history, not combined, but every individual system. Clearly, Sony are seeing just how far ahead they are of the competition, even if that competition conversation has changed. At least I would say that their main competition is the Nintendo Switch, even though if you look at the bigger productions, the big AAA games, the biggest game on the Nintendo Switch 2, Pokemon ZA, was made for a tenth of the budget than the likes of Spider-Man 2 was made. Pokemon ZA was made for about $30 million. Spider-Man 2 was made for $300 million plus. So we still do have that conversation around the AAA side of things, the higher end of production, now largely belonging only to PlayStation, which, you can argue is another reason why they should try and get as many systems out there as possible. Speaking of the generation so far as well, I just wanted to address that idea that the PlayStation 5 doesn't have any games. Because that was a fun thing to say for the first few years of the console's life cycle. I feel like it has become a bit of a meme overall, but at least now we do have a handful of games that you can only play on PlayStation 5. And even as I say that, I'm aware that some made the leap over to the PC, like The Last of Us 2 and Spider-Man 2. But for the most part, console exclusives, Death Stranding 2, Spider-Man 2, Returnal, you do have great games that are on PlayStation 5 that do show what the system can do, and they are in that upper echelon of presentation when it comes to cinematography meets gameplay. Ghost of Yotei being another exemplary example of just how well something can play overall and look in regards to a playable filmic style experience. Also, if we're talking about the generation so far, one, it's absolutely ridiculous that it's been 5 years since the launch of the PlayStation 5. The COVID era, lockdown, all that stuff, like the early Astrobot tech demo that came with the console itself, like all those memories do not feel like 5 years ago, but I do think the console generation, if we combine the PlayStation 5 experiences, the handful of really cool Xbox experiences that we've got, the ambition of something like a Hellblade 2, and the rollout of the different games across the Nintendo Switch and the Switch 2, even if the Switch 2 is an incremental step up, I still feel like Nintendo have demonstrated an incredible amount of confidence in rolling out everything from Animal Crossing through to a new Metroid Prime. I do feel like the generation itself has been really, really strong. The continuation of the indie boom from the 2010s leading to my beloved Claire Obscur, Tomorrow Comes, taking Game of the Year awards at the Golden Joysticks recently. I'm thinking it's going to get it at the VGAs in December as well. But you chart that course of, the indie period across the early 2010s, the 2D side-scrolling pixel platformer era where I felt like that was what indie games were, all the way through to something as beautiful and as much of a masterpiece as Claire Obscur is. This generation, I think, will be remembered for that real dawn of the AA experience, or whatever you want to call it, something that isn't as over-the-top bloated as a Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League or an Anthem or whatever. You can point to so many over-the-top AAA, quadruple A games that fall flat on their face. Meanwhile, you get the AA experiences, the Claire Obscurs, that manage to draw the crowds in, the Arc Raiders of the world, that just play so well and bring people in just because they trust the audience to know how to play, to understand a multifaceted game, to not have to have every last piece of an experience spoon-fed to them. So I do think this generation is emblematic of the next stage of the indie experience. And the fact that there's so much conversation around what an indie game even is fascinating in itself. So we do have that. I also think that we've hit a bit of a glass ceiling when it comes to portrayals of realism, that idea of completely lifelike, realistic graphics. You can look to the likes of a Death Stranding 2 and be like, oh my god, that is definitely Norman Reedus' face. But I do think that because there's a general acceptance of a level of realism, it's put the impetus and the onus back on gameplay mechanics. You have exemplarily playing games at super high frame rates and a super tight level of responsiveness. Games like Arc Raiders, like Battlefield 6, like Shinobi Art of Vengeance, like the Sonic Racing Crossworlds game, which is way better than it has any right to be. The return of Hollow Knight and how well Hollow Knight Silksong plays compared to the original. There are so many great playing games this generation, and it's just worth shouting those things out. I absolutely love this year of games. I am drowning in recommendable titles. I still want to get back to Ninja Gaiden 4. Ninja Gaiden Ragebound is one of my favorite games of the year, and I haven't even been able to touch Ninja Gaiden 4. So just shout out to the amount of games, the variety of titles that have come to encompass this generation. I think we are living in one of the best times for the actual games themselves. There are a lot of industry issues behind the scenes, but the actual final products that we get to play, 9 times out of 10, are just magic.